All right. Thank you, everybody. We are getting emails and phone calls, and people are reacting in a very big way to something that hasn't happened yet and won't happen until the legislature actually acts. And if we as a task force are going into meetings and telling people something is going to happen, that's a misrepresentation of the task force. And so I feel like I need to apologize for the task force, and I feel like individuals probably need to apologize to their communities, because having any kind of vote or any kind of reaction to anything that has not happened yet is not necessarily what's best for kids, and it's not best for communities, and it's really not okay. So I just need to address that up front. And if anyone wants to talk about that further, we can make time to talk about it, I think, later in the meeting. So, sure.
Just wanted to remind folks too that it is not our charge to close schools. That is not part of the work that we are doing. That is not part of the charge or part of our mandate in Act 73. So closing schools is not what we are doing.
Okay, so agenda. So we have chair updates for the next item. We have public input, so an update on our public hearings, and our first one will be this evening. Then we have a discussion on the tension points and challenges that we need to address so that we can get our work done. We don't want that to happen at the very end. We want to get that done now so we can actually produce something at the end of this task force. We have a break built in, yay. And then we will start looking, we'll adopt our final mapping template, and then we can talk about another map. We have a BOCES map on the agenda for today. We'll take a break for lunch in the middle of that, and we will keep talking about it after lunch. Then we will have a conversation about how to go forward with our future maps, some more updates from our about our report and what's happening with that, so that can be done at the end of our meetings, and then we have time for public comment. And then at the end of this meeting, we have an hour break before we open back up to a public hearing with the community and with anyone who joins us today. Are there any modifications or additions, changes to the agenda? Okay. Can we get a motion to approve the minutes from our previous meeting?
So moved.
Thanks. Do you have a question?
I just want to make a small suggestion, which is to spell out BOCES, the words.
Oh, Boards of Cooperative
Yes.
Educational Services. Yep. Thank you.
So with that change, I second the motion.
Agreed.
Great. Thank you. Any discussion on the minutes? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Thank you. Unanimously approved. Martine?
Yes, welcome everyone. So we talked a little bit last meeting about our guiding principles and norms, and just a quick reminder of what we're focusing on, building on local knowledge. We are committed to being data-driven and research-based and fact-based. We acknowledge our constraints, one of which is time, obviously. We're staying attuned to federal disruptions, we're upholding transparency, and maintaining public voice as much as we can in all that we do. Anyone have any comments or questions about those norms that we discussed last time in our meeting? Wonderful. Okay. So hopefully everyone is keeping up with public comment. There are quite a few coming in. They are being posted as quickly as possible. Some of them are long. Especially the BSBA survey, which we are very thankful for, but I think it came in at about 350 pages. There are some blank spaces in there, but it is quite extensive. So we will do our best to get through that, but I think hearing the feedback from folks who are doing the work in our school boards, on our school boards, is going to be really critical. So as you can make your way through some of those drafts, again, it's not 350 page, of single space language, but it is, there's a lot of material there. So we thank the VSBA for their help with that.
I just
Yeah, go ahead.
Just want to add to that we asked the school board chairs to give us a snapshot of what is happening today and a little bit of a look to what has happened in the past and a little bit of a look to what could happen in the future. And so I just want folks to be really clear when you're reading it, which part you're reading, right? Because what's happening today is important, what they've already done is important, and what they want to do may not be as fully fleshed out as we would like it to be, but there are some thoughts there too. So just thinking about it try not to conflate information from different sections.
Yep, exactly, yes. And you can see on the agenda, we have sort of the remaining meetings that are high level spelled out in a very high level way. Today, we are working on map drafts, as we will be on the 28th. And then on November 10th, we're going to start refining the versions that we have in front of us. On the 10th, we will be focusing in and honing in on the themes from public hearings and public comment. And then on 11/17, on November 17th, we're going to really dig into the report, which we all know is due on December 1st. And is quite a heavy lift, but we are confident that we will be able to get that done. And we thank our facilitator, Sue McCormick, who's here with us, and much appreciated for all the work that you're doing with us. We also wanted to give you an update of what's happening in between meetings. There's a lot. I think we're all very busy getting lots of emails, as was said earlier, and phone calls, connecting with folks. We, Edie, Edie, we're going with first names. Edie and I met with school board members, regional representatives, and school board chairs last week for, what was that, 2 hours? A couple hours?
Yeah.
Where we answered questions as best we could, and we had some good conversations. We were given some things to bring back, which we'll discuss in a minute. I went down to the Brattleboro area with Wendy and got to meet with some great school officials down there and had some wonderful conversations and got to see what that district sort of looks like on the ground. And it was a really great day that I had in the Brattleboro area. What else? We wanted to share with you that when we did meet with the VSBA, one of the questions that came up for us, and I wanted to share it with you, was what does to the extent practical mean, right? When we're talking about potential consolidations or mergers, there's that language in the bill that says to the extent possible. Can we think about fleshing that out a little bit more, and what does that mean? Because it seems like an important piece of the puzzle. Also, folks were wondering, what do we mean by local elementary, central, middle, and regional high school? So these are all terms that you can find in the bill. They are not defined necessarily, and I think it would be helpful for folks if we could give them a little bit more, if we could flesh them out a little bit more and give them a little bit more meaning, sort of across the board. So hopefully we will have time to do that at some point. Yeah, any questions so far? Otherwise, I will pass the mic over to Sue, who's going to talk about public input and public hearing updates.
Thank you. And I think, Maud, if you could make me a presenter or something, if you could present for me. Maud?
Yep, let me just, I'm sorry, I'm trying to share that over here. It's not working. Sue, you sent me your presentation?
I did.
Oh my goodness, okay.
Well, while Maud is working on that, I guess I can just speak to some of these things. So our team put together a spreadsheet where we're tracking the public comments, we're theming them, we're tagging places where they have specific requests of the task force. And so we're just starting to work on all of that to make that usable for you. And if anybody wants access to that spreadsheet, you're welcome to have it. And I'll just say that what we've noticed so far is there's been about 106 comments from 68 individuals or groups. And a big majority of comments have come from school administrators or school board members, almost 50 comments. We have 14 people who have identified as community members, 9 people parents, 8 advocacy groups, 5 educators, and 2 business owners. That doesn't totally add up because some people have multiple roles. And so some key themes, which won't be a surprise, they're among the comments that you all have received so far. There's strong support for supervisory unions, local control, and collaboration. We're hearing a lot of skepticism about consolidation. There's a lot of questions about the data, the cost, the impacts on equity and access. A lot of people are writing in to talk about the importance of small schools as essential to communities and their civic life. We are getting comments that people are saying if it does make sense, there's some openness to mergers, citing possible cost savings and increased efficiency and transparency, and talking about benefits to students. And finally, people are asking for a better process, more transparency, more time, and more opportunities for meaningful participation. Those are some of the themes that we're hearing so far, and we just wanted to point out that it seems like lots of voices are coming from within the education system, and so just having us all keep in mind the voices we're not hearing from. Any questions about that? And then for you've got this up, so if you could go to slide 5, I guess would be helpful. Whoops, back a couple. There, the VSBA survey. So as you know, you all just got this huge document, but I think just the high level finding is that almost everybody is talking about this, and 77% of the people who responded to the survey have already reached out to potential partners to talk about what collaboration could look like. And I think a lot of that document is really about some of those potential partnerships and collaborators, and so there's probably a lot of really rich information in there. And that's it for a little update about that. In terms of the public hearing tonight, I'm not sure what room we're going to be in here. I think we're going to be in the cafeteria. Is that true, Chrissy?
No, we're gonna be in here.
I thought, yes. Oh, we're going to be in here for the public hearing. Okay. So the way that is going to work tonight is there's going to be a presentation by the co-chairs. We're going to set up some stations around the room to give people some different opportunities to give input. Not everybody wants to come and speak at a mic. And then we'll have a period at the end for some traditional public comment. I'm looking for some volunteers to be at each of the stations. At every station we ask some questions, and we also are going to have a QR code, so if people would rather do it on their phones online, they could do it that way, or they can work with chart paper and sticky dots and things like that. So I think, Wendy, you said you'd be at station number 1. Station number 2 is going to be priority setting, and we're going to have a grid where people can put dots and X's to share priorities. You're sitting right here. Would you be willing to hand the station? And then station 3 is blank paper where people can just write a note to you all. So does somebody want to volunteer to be there?
Just put me wherever you
Rebecca,
want.
station
Just to sign
3.
us. We're all
Okay.
here.
And then station 4 is the sign-up sheet for public comment, and it's going to be first come, first served. So just somebody there to explain to people if they want to do public comment, they should sign up.
I agree with Rebecca, just put me in any station.
So Rebecca 3, Beth 4. We only have an hour between, so I just want to make sure we have that all set. Does anybody have any questions about tonight?
Is everyone staying? I just want to make sure, is everyone staying until?
I'll stay.
I'll also say that we have a half hour for the interactive part. after the presentation, we're not going to do Q&A, we're gonna go right into the interactive part. So if you all are available to just be, if some people may wanna just ask some questions, so that would be great. And then for public comment, we're just asking you all to be interspersed with everybody so that people can face their community when they speak and they're not speaking to a panel at the front of the room. Okay. Thanks.
I have a question. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna add, Sue, that there's a hybrid component for folks who wish to come in virtually. There's an online form that would be their version of the stations. And there'll also, if I'm remembering correctly, be QR codes at the stations if people prefer to do the virtual form. Sue's gonna help us theme when we give people information about what their neighbors and friends are
Yes.
saying.
So virtual participants will be able to give the same input as people in the room through 3 separate little surveys. And we'll be looking at that in real time and try to get a sense of what people have to say to us. And we'll expect a few bumps, cause this is the first one, and then we'll smooth it out for the next time.
Wendy?
I think it will go very well. I have a question about the boards who have reached out to potential partners, or a suggestion really, is that if we could map that, not as a map for consideration of something to implement, but just so that we can show visually what we're hearing from boards. I think that would be really helpful.
I'm looking at John over there, see if that might be possible.
The comments?
Just the comments that, where one district will say, we're consulting with District X to merge. And so I just think it would be helpful to have those comments, since they're geographically based, shown on a map. But it wouldn't be one of the 3 maps, the official maps.
We can work
We
with you,
can-
so,
We'll
Yeah,
try to
it's-
do that.
great.
Yeah, it's from the specific database from the VSBA, so we can talk about that.
Thank you.
Great. Anything else?
Well-
Yeah, go ahead, Jen.
I just have a question, and I haven't had a chance to look at this, but 97% of responding boards, what percentage of boards actually responded?
Yes.
I think there were 68 responses to the survey, but I'm not sure if I have
So
that right.
68
It's-
responses, and we
It's
had-
probably,
But some of them were representing multiple boards. If they responded as an
Yes,
SU
can we have
anyway.
Sue speak?
Oh, sorry. I was gonna, Sue from, who organized it is here. Do we want, is that okay if we bring her to the table and ask her to, or just have her answer a couple questions? Are folks good with that? Yes?
Sure.
Great. I was gonna say, even take one.
Thank you, Chrissy.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sue Siglaski. I'm the Executive Director for the Vermont School Boards Association. The survey was sent to every board chair of a school district, supervisory district, and supervisory union. So it was sent to 132 individuals. Some of those individuals may chair more than one board. We asked them if they did chair more than one board to submit a response for each board that they chaired. And we received 67 responses. And it was open from September 17th through October 6th. I think we could have gotten more responses if we were able to leave it open for a longer time. We did have several, we did have feedback that that was a very short time frame. And we knew that you needed this information quickly because of your time frame. So that's why we closed it on October 6th. You're welcome.
Any other questions on this survey?
I have a question for the task force. Has everyone received, or has everyone seen the survey that came from the commission on the future of public education?
So this is not responses, the survey itself.
Survey, not
Have you,
responses.
Jen?
No, I would love it if in this, somewhere in that presentation, it would say approximately 50% of boards respond, or chairs responded, just as a footnote, so it puts that in the context of the feedback that we're getting.
Yes.
Sorry.
That's okay.
No, good.
And maybe mention that time was a major factor, and so, number of responses. Okay, well, if anyone hasn't received the commission survey, let me know and we'll make sure to get it to you. And please share within your networks. Great. Sue, did you have anything else? Okay.
At some point today, I just want to map with folks who's going to be at all of the different outreach events that we're having. I know some are pretty far from folks, some are closer to folks than these meetings, and so I just want to make sure we're going to have enough people to staff and listen. Obviously, we're working really hard to make sure that the remote option is as robust as an in-person option, and so you can always attend remotely. But it's going to be important for me to know who's actually going to be at the meetings. So we can do that.
I think to that point, Edie, we learned from legal counsel that if we have a quorum, we're a formal meeting, and if not, we're not. So I think that is important to be mindful of, to be able to let Edie know. And I think our presence virtually would count towards the quorum. So just so people keep in mind.
So tonight, we are here from 4:30 to 6:30. And in case people have already forgotten, we're in Oxbow High School in Bradford, Vermont. Next Thursday, October 16th, we're at Leland and Gray in Townsend, Vermont from 6 to 8 p.m. Wednesday, the 22nd, we're at Rutland High School from 6 to 8 p.m. And Tuesday, October 28th, it's an all-day meeting at Winooski High School, and we are ending our meeting there with a public hearing from 6 to 8 p.m. And that's Tuesday, the 28th. Great. Okay. I think we're ready to move on. Anything else on public engagement, public hearings?
I think not engagement, but our meeting in Winooski, I think, is starting an hour later, if I'm remembering correctly, to condense the time and let people have more time for travel.
Great.
But,
Thank you.
yeah.
All right, then I think we are ready to move on to our next discussion.
Advance to slide 6, that would be great, just the next slide. Thank you. So at the last meeting, we were talking about a map, and then the discussion got a little derailed, and it became clear that there's some really tough issues that this task force is probably not going to resolve, but that if we don't surface them and address them in some way, it might really derail the task force's ability to get its work done. And so to help us talk about this, I just first of all want to be really clear about a couple of things. First of all, I just want to acknowledge how hard it is to talk about these big issues in this setting where there's a lot of people are watching you, and it's going to be hard. So I'm just going to acknowledge that. But despite that, it can really be helpful. So we're pausing now so that later on, when we get further on in the process, you all can have what you need to be able to have those harder conversations. I just also want to stress this isn't about debating these really deep issues or trying to solve them. It's really about the task force identifying places where you have to be able to talk through them to make progress and do your work, and places where you can not have to deal with certain things and just say, we acknowledge that this is a challenging issue, but we don't have to deal with this to get our work done. So to help us with this conversation, we sent a one-question survey around to the task force, and most of you answered it, so thank you so much for that. And if we go to the next slide, those are the discussion goals that I just talked through. And then the next slide after that, these are the 3 key areas. And these won't be a surprise to you, but most of the people that responded said that this, the governance structure question, supervisory unions versus supervisory districts, feels really like a tension point that we may really need to address. And some of the questions that came from the responses were questions around what level of consolidation is necessary or desirable, how does the governance model affect things like accountability and equity, and then what are the strengths and weaknesses of different options. So that's one tension point. The second one is the idea of the public system versus a mixed system. So people had questions about how should independent schools and tuitioning fit within a consolidated system, and what's the balance around choice, fairness, and sustainability. And then people asked questions about the impact of taxpayer-funded private schools on disadvantaged kids. And then the third one had to do with this idea of vision and educational equity, and people were asking about what kind of consistency across the state and opportunities for students should consolidation aim to achieve, and how can the work stay grounded in the outcomes that we want for students and not just structures. So there were questions about how important is it for this body to kind of have that vision. So I'm just going to pause there for just a little bit of reaction, and then we'll do the next step in this exercise. Any surprises, or is this all, you've held these tensions, you know what they are, right? Okay.
Are we allowed to add? Can we add?
Sure.
Because I
Of
thought of
course.
another one. This was something that came up during the legislative session, and I didn't think to write it here, but it just came to mind, which is the conflict between our connection and affection for the past versus the future. We talked a lot about structures that have been around for 100 years, 200 years, and, you know, that's part of who we are, et cetera, et cetera. And then we talked a lot, especially in the finance committee that I was in, about the future state. You know, what are we going toward? Where are we headed? What's the path? And for me, those are a little bit in conflict. And I think if we have time to talk about that, it could be interesting, because and we may not agree, but it just seems like something that we might want to speak about.
Any other tensions that this didn't capture that you all think are really important?
No, I don't have nothing to input on that question.
Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I did. Sue, how does this list line up with what Act 73 said our charge was?
That's the next slide.
Okay,
And
great,
the next
thank you.
question. So,
Nice segue.
wait, oh no, that's not a slide. That's actually a document, sorry. Maud, if you could help me put up the document that I sent.
Before we move on, are we moving on the tab?
No, we're not, we're moving on in the top. So what I wanted to do, so I'm gonna ask the question that Scott asked to this group, because I don't have the answer. This is the group has to answer that. So I wanted to ask you to go through each of these and do a little bit of individual reflection and work, and we can talk about it. And so the two things that I want to help you all surface is where around each of these tensions does the task force need to have some alignment so you can go forward and do credible work? And where can you proceed despite the differences and it won't block your progress? And I had sent a document to, okay. And so what I wanted to do is to ask you all to just do like a minute of writing just on the first one around governance structure. So one of the questions that's, and I'm going to take notes so that we can capture the conversation, but so one question is, does the task force need to specify a governance mechanism in proposed maps? That's a question. What do you think, what level of consolidation is necessary or desirable for the task force to meet its charge? And what are some criteria that might need to guide decision-making around this question of SUs or SDs? So those are a couple of prompts. And then where can different views about this issue of supervisory unions versus school districts coexist without getting in the way of developing maps? So those are the two things that I want to ask you to just do a little writing and reflection for a minute, and then we can, as a group, just capture some of your ideas and your thinking.
Is that, do you want us to write on paper?
Yeah, you can write on
I have
paper,
a- I
whatever,
have a pen.
however
I
you
just
want
don't have
to
it.
write. On paper, on the computer.
Oh, I have a notepad and lots of paper. It's right here.
Is anyone else?
I have paper versions of this, if that would be helpful.
That would be,
Oh,
that would be
thank
very
you.
Yeah.
appreciated.
What was the third one?
What criteria might guide when each model fits. We're just asking you to look at the first, just the first one.
Oh, we're just doing the first one.
Just the first one.
Oh, okay.
Talking to them.
Thank you.
Okay. So whoever's ready, I'm going to take some notes. So where in the task force's charge do you have to address this issue of governance structure? Where do you think the task force needs some alignment in order to do their work? So we'll start with that, and then we'll ask the question, where can we proceed without having to resolve this issue? So I'll just invite whoever's ready to start offering some thoughts, and I'm going to try to capture them.
So to put a finer point on the first question, since the last meeting, I've been thinking about that and whether we establish a county structure or a CTE or whatever it is, but that say there are X number of regions. Within each region, could there be variation? For instance, the Chittenden County region might decide to adopt a different governance structure than the Wyndham region. And I'm wondering if that could be possible. So we do develop a map, whatever the map is, but within the region of the map, could there be variation across, let's say it's counties, so that let's, for simplicity, there are 14 counties. Could the structure in Bennington County be different from the structure in Windsor County? Locally driven, sort of organically driven within that region. So that is not a statement, that's just a question.
So do we have to have an insight as well?
Go ahead, Beth.
And for me, it's not just about local preferences, it's about legality. There are rules around, different operating structures not being in the same school district. So I think definitely there are regions of the state, just based on their structure, are going to have different governing structures.
So from day one, I sort of assumed what Dave was saying. I thought the map would include both. And I think governance is key, or the maps won't be workable. I think you got to have like a solid governance, even a hybrid, or the maps aren't going to work. So I did bring up the SDSU issue on the 29th because I think it's important to give local communities choice. I do. So.
When you say, Chris, just say more. When you say the maps can't work without governance structure, tell us what your thought process is.
I don't know if I can, Sue. I just think we got to have a governance structure for the maps to be successful? I don't know if I can even expand on that.
Maybe I can.
Yeah, go for it, Scott. Yeah, take it.
Yeah, I think that, if without that governance structure, in areas of the state that use SUs, they would have no confidence of where they would end up or who they would be partnered with. And I think likewise on the SD, there may be concerns there on a local control issue, like not understanding it. Could we cut this up into 3 districts within this one bigger? It would be a huge can of worms. I don't think that we could. I don't think we could control. I think it would get way out of hand.
No, I think you got it, Scott. Yeah.
Go ahead, Wendy.
I think when we talk about SDs and SUs, we end up being on Team SD or Team SU, and I think we need to be really specific about what it is, what the component is within that structure that we're either advocating for or advocating against at that time, because it's just more complicated than one or the other. And I hope that we're not necessarily required as a state to have just those 2 models. I don't know why we can't be more creative.
I'm on team that works for a specific area of the state.
Right. I just think we ought to be more creative and talk about if it's tuitioning that we're talking about, support to private schools, support to public schools in other states. I think we just got to be really specific when we're talking about these structures, rather than just using them as because if you say you want something to be an SU, you want that for a reason. So just let's specify our reasons instead of just having that big set of factors.
Go ahead.
Kim and then Jay.
Thank you, and I think I'm going to expand a little bit on Wendy's initial thought around what is it we want these systems to do. I agree, the titles of what those bodies currently are, and to Martine's point, our current history and existence versus a future state that Edie maybe described at our last meeting, like who knows, maybe there's something else we should be designing for. So on that vein, I would say that we need to be clear about what these governance systems are accountable for and have responsibility to outcomes for students pre-K-12. I think that there are probably ways to think creatively about what that looks like for an SU or whatever we call it, some third thing. Common curriculum, graduation requirements, professional development, supports. I am hearing loudly the importance of local voice and proportional representation in decision-making bodies. And that I think we want to understand what local control means in those contexts, recognizing that if you're not responsible for the full pre-K-12 with a coordinated, collaborative effort, you really actually have no control over the pieces that you are sending your kids off to. So I think it's just really important. An SU structure, maybe in different legal, with changes in the law, can have that responsibility, and those participating within it can have the requirement to be understanding how students are prepared throughout the full spectrum so that they're ready when they go into the world after high school. So those are more things rather than names of structures, and those seem really important for student outcomes, accountability to taxpayers, and preparedness of students and staff.
So, in contemplating this whole idea of governance structure, that's sort of my meltdown last meeting, it's just really difficult for my simple mind to conceptualize this, but I really believe that the sequencing in Act 73 has created a cart and horse problem. And it's, for me, it's almost impossible to think of how we're going to make an effective map if we haven't already answered questions about governance. Because if the legislature and our existing structures were part of a process where they said, okay, this is going to be our governance structure, it would almost tell us where to make the maps. And so I find it hard to separate myself from all those questions, all that data, and just focus on making a map when those things dictate where those lines are. The map, and I've been working a lot with my son, who's a GIS expert, and he said, Dad, why are you starting with a map? You start with a plan, and then you map once you have a plan. And so here we are, we're stuck with this, we have to do it. So to do it right requires us to pay attention to these other things. I fear a little bit that if we just leave it up to some organic, like, oh, I'm going to partner with you and I'm going to partner with you, it's going to be like gym class in middle school. For my dodgeball team, I'm going to pick the kids that can throw the best and catch the best, and to heck with all the others. And I think if we're going to do that, we're going to create a situation where we can say all we want about equity, but we're certainly not creating a plan that's going to improve equity in the state. You're going to have districts that are alike, that want to be together, faced with the inevitability of consolidation, and those that don't have those resources or those relationships are going to be left on the periphery. And so it's really difficult for me to answer this. I think we really do need to have at least a sense of what the governance mechanisms are going to be, or we're stuck in this, like, here we are with our current system, and we're trying to appease everybody who has an opinion about how to be the least disruptive and leave all these structures in place, when what we're asking for with a total reformation of our education system in Vermont is like blowing it up and starting over. You can't do that in 6 meetings. You can't do that in 1 year. I'm having to make sense of all this, having to take like a 10-year view of how any of this could work. Because many of you won't be here as legislators if we tick off enough of the people that vote for you, or don't. And I fear in this whole argument that I see kind of under the surface about things like choice and all of that, that there'll be political judo going on, where it's if I can blame one party for obstructing this process, or if I can, and this is purely bipartisan. I'm saying this from a nonpartisan view. It's like, it's going to be political leverage one way or another. If we make a plan and a majority group has an opinion that ticks off the most people in the state, they'll be the minority. So it's really rough, and I still believe there's a lot of really good discussion, a lot of really good planning that can come out of this, but this is a central concern.
Go ahead, Rebecca, and then Jen.
Jen was next.
Jen, then Rebecca.
So I'm a rule follower. The law says we should do these things. There's a word in there that says practical. And the proportional representation thing is a constitutional issue. So I think we should flush out 3 maps, and we should talk about all the unintended consequences. And that's all.
Great.
Rebecca was next.
I just wanted to.
Thank you for saying what you said. I've gotten a couple messages that sound an awful lot like, should we throw this district off the island so we can do this? And I really worry about that, because that has never been how Vermont education worked. It has never been about what's good for you individually. It's always been about how are we going to work together to do this. And I really hope we don't create a situation where it's just each person for themselves, because that is a path to nowhere. And I also hope in the context of this, I mean, an SD and an SU is a very specific structure with a very specific definition. And yes, we have to have one of them, but we also, there's a lot of variety even among SDs and even among SUs around the state. So even within that, I don't even know that we're talking about the same thing sometimes. And I also think we're making a mistake in not looking at where we've come from. And we were looking at some of the data. I think when Richard Kate wrote his report in 2006, we had something like 56 or 50 something SUs, and now we're down to about 24. And the most common district structure in the state of Vermont now is an SD, and it wasn't like that just a couple years ago. And I think there's some powerful lessons to be learned from the people who merged about why they merged and what came out of that, and from the regions where there weren't mergers, and it is still an SU. I think we need to take the time to figure out what's driving that before we make assumptions about how a changed governance model would or would not affect them. And I think, with respect, you gave the example of not taking that time. You can merge someone on paper, but if still they don't believe it, nothing is going to change. And if this process is supposed to be about improving education and bringing down cost, and frankly doing better for hardworking Vermonters and our kids, we have to take the time to do it right, because if we don't, we're going to do a tremendous amount of damage. And I think that's why it's hard.
Chris, did you still want to say
I
something?
was just going to add what Jen, on top of what Jen said, is I think the law says that it provides for both SUs and SDs. I mean, so it's not too much to add, but I think we can propose
And
both.
one map has to.
At least one.
map
Yeah,
has to.
yeah. So, I mean, I've been going on that since August.
Right.
Yeah.
Beth,
And I'll
then-
come back again, it's not just what's in statute, there are constitutional issues around education in Vermont. And as you said, an SD is a very specific definition, and so is an SU. And there are legal and constitutional issues around that governing structure that we may not have any control over anyway, and it varies across state. And yeah, you can have an SU like the one I taught in that has 2 school districts. One for all the elementary schools is one district, the high school is the second. The SU north of me has 15 school districts in that one SU, so they're very different. Just saying SU SD doesn't really give you the picture of what kind of consolidation happened or not. It's a lot more nuanced than that.
Kim, did you?
I was just gonna say if we really believe we're just constrained to those 2 things, we are very limited. And I think if we believe that within a legal framework, there could be additional expectations at an SU level that require that we're paying attention to opportunities and outcomes for kids across the pre-K-12, that it is a responsibility if you are participating, public or private, within an SU, there's a collaboration that is happening so that there is information going back and forth to inform preparedness before they get to high school, and opportunities are equitable across that. That happens in an SD if it's a pre-K-12 SD, and resources are allocated in that way. But in an SU, if we were to think about what in law needs to change to do the accountability we're talking about that we said was important, I think we have the opportunity to make recommendations for changes in statute that wouldn't violate the, I forget what the law is that says, like, you can't have different structures in an SD or something, different tuitioning patterns in an SD.
Right.
So,
Rebecca has a question for you.
yeah.
Can I just ask you to elaborate? Because I think part of it is, I think when we say SU and SD, I think we have very different understandings of what that means around the table, and I think that's part of the problem. So, for example, Kingdom Choice, it's a single unified district. It doesn't operate any schools at all. So how are they doing those things that you said have to be part of an SD? Well, I'm just telling you. I'm just saying. No, but that's the problem right there. To me, SD isn't about organized governance. It's about having the same operating structures. Right. And so Kingdom Choice doesn't operate any schools at all. All it literally has to do is sign the checks. Right? And then you have some supervision and oversight of special education because a legal entity that's an LEA can't ever get rid of that. But they don't coordinate the education of their students. They don't even have the test scores of half their students.
How is that local control then?
It's not local control, but it.
So I guess that's my
But
question.
but
Like,
the
our
reason they
system
want
should
it is,
be able to.
but if they were merged, for example, with, if a K-12 tuition district was merged with a K-12 operating district, you'd have to decide, does everyone get tuitioned or does everyone be part of this operating district? So that's the issue, and I think we're conflating local control with SU and SD, and that's actually not what it's about.
I guess let's play that example where I'm not terribly familiar, but that example, if the SU law were changed to say if you are receiving public tuition students within an SU, you have a responsibility to be collaborating on student preparedness and outcomes, opportunities and outcomes across a pre-K-12. You can't get rid of the responsibility as an LEA for the provisions of special ed services, right? You have to.
Education agency.
Local education agency.
What they do is they would contract for special ed oversight, but they don't run any schools.
No, I understand, but I'm just saying, could we imagine? I'm interested in us thinking about what we could imagine, whatever the structure needs to be, if it's not yet created in law or it needs modification in law, so that if you're participating and publicly tuition students are attending wherever they're going, and the superintendent of the SU, these newly created SUs, has a responsibility for ensuring there's quarterly collaboration or the accountability on data and student outcomes that we aren't getting right now. So that's what I would hope.
I think we're going to pull it back.
Yes, thank you, sorry.
I just have to point out that the SUs that I'm associated with, past and present, we do that. Everything is collaborative. It's not quarterly, it's.
But that's the issue, right? That some do and some don't.
But that's a school board issue.
Is it across pre-12?
That's a school board
It's
issue.
also a structure issue, because if the same structure allows such variance, then you can't ensure that education opportunity is equal across the state.
Because the variance in governance doesn't ensure that students have a pre-K through 12 curriculum, educational opportunity, all of that. And so I think we just have to be really clear, right? We all have assumptions on what any one of these things means because it means something different for each of us across the state. And that's what we have to surface. I don't know that we can solve it. I know we're not charged to solve it. I don't know if we can solve it, but I think that's part of it, right? When we're talking about it, we have to understand that it can mean there are no students, and the supervisory union is just sending all their students and paying a tuition bill. It can mean, I was part of a supervisory union that had a K through 12 mostly unified curriculum. But opportunity wasn't equal in all of the different schools in that district because the local budgets were not allowing for that because local taxation did not allow for equal opportunity, right? So there are lots of different levers and layers within that one structure.
So I want to pull it back, if we can, to the implications for the task force. So you all, you've surfaced that this is incredibly complex. The beginning of the conversation, it sounded like people were saying it doesn't have to be one size fits all, right? Tell me a little bit about the implication for the maps, and Jay, you said the cart's before the horse, so we heard that too. But what are the implications for your work going forward? You're going to be looking at some maps. How do you want to approach this really complex issue where people have a lot of different views around the table about kind of the implications of these different structures?
I'll just answer that very sort of bluntly. I think when you present a map, you should present with it some kind of a governance model. You can't say, I don't think you should be able to say, I'm agnostic. I think it has to be, this is my map, and this is what I perceive the governance structure to be on this map. I think that would be very helpful to everybody.
I would like us to just use the words with their definitions that are commonly accepted and laid out in statute. If it says supervisory district, you're talking about a district, you're not talking about an SU, and that is how the entire state is reading it, whatever you say here, because that's what it is.
Yes.
So we can't just like make up new categories to avoid being specific, because the whole field, part of the reason people are so worried right now is we're throwing this around, and they're knowing what the implications are for them, and we're kind of pretending that's not true.
is there, so, go ahead. Wendy.
Can we, when we specify, it's basically specifying our assumptions in the map. Can we go deeper than just saying SD and say what it is about the SD that is especially, if there is a component that's particularly?
I don't think we can, because that's not I mean, again, unless we're going to rewrite Title 16, that's actually not the job of this task force.
Yeah, no, I wasn't suggesting in the mapping and the assumptions that we have something that's contrary to current statute, but just being very clear about what the components of SD or SU that we are assuming for a particular map.
I think that's reasonable, and I respectfully disagree with what you're saying, because I also think it's reasonable to say that this can't work with the current structure that we have, right? So we can say...
What do you disagree with? Like, do you disagree with the definition in statute
Well,
of SD?
because supervisory union is so different across the state, that somebody putting that in there might mean a certain part, like it might not mean non-operating districts. They might mean something different by a supervisory union.
How is that different than SDs? Because the same is true for SDs.
Right. I guess what I...
Because this is my
maybe I
point
should say
again.
it
We're
differently.
conflating operating structure
Yep.
with the governance structure. They're not the same thing. One is SUSD, those are governing constructs.
Yep.
And then the operating structure is entirely separate and could be mapped in 100 different ways across those governance structures. And I think some of us are talking as if those are the same thing. And my example of Kingdom Choice is they're not the same thing.
Right.
And that's why I have such a hard time understanding what we're talking about sometimes, because these are not the same things, and we're conflating them.
So I don't think everyone has as deep of an understanding of education as a lot of us at the table, and specifically some of us at the table, right? And so I think it is helpful to have the pieces that you think are important for everyone to have a common understanding, because what you said makes sense to a lot of people and doesn't make sense to everyone at the table, and for sure not everyone across the state. And I know, right, like you know this better than...
But if we're going to district, I mean, our task isn't re-SU. Our task was to redistrict.
Yep.
We need to know what a district is, and we need to understand the implications of that before we recommend districts.
Which is, I think, what Wendy's
Right.
talking about. What are the pieces that you need to maintain in order to make this work?
And I wasn't suggesting that if a piece is not there, that means we are presuming that it doesn't exist. I just think it would be helpful to state our assumptions, basically.
Yeah, and could we go with the definition in statute? And if
Yes.
we want to recommend changes in statute, I mean, I think my problem is these are very specific definitions. And I think we're attaching things that aren't part of that definition to that definition. And if we could be very clear about those definitions, and then very clear about what we mean about operating structures, we might be able to disentangle those conversations.
Yes, and can I say one more thing? So when I was saying we don't need to be beholden to one or the other, I meant like in this whole process, not the mapping process. Because I think the state could think of other options, but obviously,
Sure.
you know, that's a big conversation.
Yeah.
But I do think it's important that we clarify exactly what we're talking about in the maps.
Yes. Is there somebody around this table that will provide those definitions for the task force consideration? Because it sounds like people have different
Oh, yeah,
ideas.
they're in law. I can
They're
pull
in
their
law, so we
statute.
can pull those out.
I could
Kim
probably
and
have
then
them
Jen.
emailed.
I was just going to say that it might be important for us to identify what are the characteristics that must be present in a governance model to be effective in what we're suggesting. So I think it's similar to what Wendy's saying and what I had said earlier. Can't we identify what a governance structure needs to be responsible for, whether it's an SU or an SD, and how it is configured to be able to consider the precious resources and their allocation to the experiences, opportunities, and outcomes for students pre-K-12, and local engagement with that. So SD may need to be refined to say there will be school-based advisory councils, there will be representation, reporting necessary from those to the SD board, for instance. I'd rather see us trying to solve for the problems that we're hearing. We're hearing fear of loss of voice, of loss of control, and we're hearing and knowing challenges with being able to even know how kids are doing, because some of our structures are so small, and to even understand what a high quality central, middle, and regional high school is. We put it in law, but we haven't spoken to it.
Yeah.
Those are things I think we could do, and I'd love for us to figure out what we agree on there.
So in the context of this conversation, this is going to segue into your next question, because this is inextricably linked to choice.
Yes, it
And
is.
let me give you 2 examples. Essex, Westford. Westford used to have choice. Some of those kids went to Mount Mansfield, some maybe went to Burlington High School, some went to Essex. When they merged, they all now go to Essex High School. That's a huge district. It's, whatever. But Westford could not keep its own district, because as a supervisory union, if you live in Westford and I live in Essex, it's not fair that you have choice and I don't. So it has to be the same. That is fundamentally different than NEK Choice, which has Ferdinand, Maidstone, East Haven, each town population 72, 86, number of kids 1, 3, 5. Some jump the river and they go over to Vermont, to Groveton. Some will go, excuse me, New Hampshire, they're in Vermont.
Vermonters in New Hampshire.
Right, and the river is owned by New Hampshire. But it's the only river in the country, by the way, that is owned by one state. But some of those kids in East Haven might go to Burke Town School, or they might go to an independent school, but they have choice. If that is part of a school district, it will have to, because you can't have a different thing than me. We got to have the same opportunities. So when we talk about the governance structure and the operating structure, it is inextricably linked to this question of choice and size, everything else. This is one of the key pieces. And so as we segue to the next piece, I just wanted to give you that sort of bone.
Yeah, okay, well, let's do that, because we don't have much time, but I tried to capture a few potential next steps, which is I want to test for agreement that when maps are presented, they should include a suggested governance model. Is there agreement about that around the table?
Can you say that again, sir?
That when maps are presented, they should include a suggested governance model to go with them.
I agree, so long as it conforms with statute and constitutionality. I mean, it's a legal definition. It's a constitutional, that's constitutional. It's beyond statute, what you just mentioned. I mean, we can suggest it, but it may not fly.
Can I throw a little nuance on the guiding? Is that all right?
Sure.
I mean, I think it's important not to understand local control and centralization as just polar opposites. I mean, an SU itself is an effort to consolidate, and we can debate the effectiveness and the efficiency of that particular design, but it is a consolidation of curriculum development, oversight for special education, other things. We can debate whether it's enough. I actually think one of the challenges, and some of the data we've seen has suggested this, is that actually our regions, including our SDs and our SUs, aren't big enough to do. And it's not just about SUs, it's also frankly about SDs to solve some of the challenges that we have around special education, around professional development. I don't care how hard our SDs and our SUs both work, if they aren't within a supportive, coherent state framework, which we do not have right now. So in terms of centralization and local control, I think you'll find that in every system, no matter what governance they have, there is some effort to keep some things close to kids and move some things farther out to get the benefits of scale. And I think that's what we need to have is a conversation about where those services need to be placed to give the best benefit to kids at a price people can continue to support. And so I think there's a lot of flexibility there, so I don't want to treat it as like a poll. You either like local control or you like centralization.
Okay. So, in the interest of time, we have 2 more really thorny things. Well, I think the vision and quality one kind of started to come up already, but let's talk about this next one, about the role of independent schools and tuitioning. And so, how do you want to treat this in map design, as integral parts of the design or contextual factors? Do you need a shared understanding of how choice and equity interact? What are the assumptions you're making about non-operating districts? So do you all want to just start talking, or do you want a minute to write and reflect? We only have a couple minutes left.
Is this the same thing? Any map that gets
Presented has to just show what it includes.
I would say so. As I said, it's linked to the governance structure because of the constitutionality piece.
And some of it's linked to just the geography. You know, like it's like when I looked at the county map, it's like there is one public high school in all of Essex County, and it's in Canaan. So a student in Concord who lives on the border with St. Johnsbury, is it practical for them to go to the public high school of Canaan?
Yeah, it's a 90-minute.
Or to the independent school that's 10 minutes away? And those are decisions that are made a lot in my region where schools just don't exist. Elementary schools, public schools aren't there, and we're not going to build any in the next year or two.
We'll see.
Well, we've actually closed them. We've
closed
closing
them.
public schools.
Yeah.
We are closing public
The
schools
school I
right
went
now.
to is closed.
Again, I think this is accountability for me. So independent or public schools receiving tuitioned students on choice should be collaborating within that SU to ensure students are prepared when they get to their destination of their high school or middle school or wherever they're going, and that they're ready for the world when they're done. And so I understand that is not currently probably in the requirements of an SU model, but I think that's the problem we're solving for. We're solving for that, local voice, equity of opportunity for students. It's in the intent of the law.
So you're going to the next question.
I am, and I don't think any of these can be pulled out, but I do think if accountability were the same across the structure, I think it is less of an issue. If the expectations are the same for everybody participating in a system, if they are accepting public tuition, then that collaboration happens. It must happen.
What makes you think that collaboration doesn't happen?
Right.
It's not by design, by structure, by reporting, by accountability. There's none of that happening right now. So if it were happening, it should be evidenced in data, right? And it is, I'm not suggesting it may not be, but it's not by design. And we are sitting here to, in theory, build or recommend maps that are built by design to be better than our inconsistent systems right now.
I think what you're talking about right now, while I agree it's important, is far outside of what this task force is supposed to do.
How do we draw maps, though, if not solving for the
Let me
problems in
finish
law?
my thought. Those types of things can be addressed in other legislation, possibly 2200 rules if they're not already addressed. Different rules regarding how SDs or SUs operate. But that conversation is, in my opinion, far outside of what we're doing here.
But Scott, help me understand this sincerely. When we put out a CTE district and we're looking at, Danville and Cabot closing, we're organizing a district entirely. Well, we're organizing, but the map that was put on the table was for a CTA district that's entirely organized around the two historical academies.
There's something going on with the microphone
It's around the
over here
CTE
on
center in
Teams.
that area.
Yeah. Which is hosted at the academies.
Yeah, but we could make the same comment about Stafford. We're doing a tech center around Rutland. I mean, it's where the tech center is. I mean,
Can we pause for 1 second?
Okay, it sounds like it's back in. There was something
Okay.
with the microphone over here on Teams where some voices weren't getting picked up, so I just wanted to make sure that we're, but it sounds like it's better now.
So we're trying to get this computer hooked into Ethernet.
Okay, I think it's better now. There was a comment, the conversation about how this works wasn't fully heard on Teams, and so I think just to wrap it, to understand that
perhaps things are working in some parts of the state and in other parts of the state, and the system that we have today is not ensuring that it's happening consistently across the state. And that's what we need to solve for, and that's part of why we're in the problem that we have today, is that we don't have consistent opportunity across the state. And so while you might believe truly that we can solve this in a different way, if we don't take it into account as we're putting these maps together, then we're dropping the ball too, because our intent is to make a better system for all students across the state. That's part of the legislative intent.
And I think, again, like I said before, whatever maps we end up with and the report that goes with them, we can put in there how we are anticipating it could improve this. But a lot of this already exists in the 2200s. It's in statute. Whether it's being followed or not from place to place to place is different than does it actually exist already. And we can say we're hoping that this will encourage this, but it's really the execution of it, which we have no control over.
Well, the fact that we have, I'm just going to say, independent school assessment data, we know it's cleaned and it won't be shared by the Agency of Education, shows you that we do not have similar accountability. Because we've got a governor running all over the state talking about the public schools and their declining scores. The independent school scores are in those public data. They have them and they will not share them.
Well, and we don't have all the data from all our public schools either, because some of them are too small to report.
Yes.
I don't-
It's aggregated by SU. You do have it by SU.
One at a time, Scott,
Okay.
and then Kim. Scott, you were
Okay.
next.
Okay. I don't know what the rules are as far as whether public or independent or reveal scores or who holds those scores or, but if that needs to be cleaned up, that is far outside of drawing maps for different areas of the state, in my opinion.
So there's something going on, nobody can hear you when you're talking on Teams.
Oh,
I don't know.
well, I don't know what I
I don't
can
know
do
why
differently.
it's a Teams.
I'm not an AV person.
I don't know.
Maybe
These
that
mics
one
work
closer.
different.
Maybe that mic isn't on.
I don't know. I never turned it on. Did anybody else?
Plug in.
They're all fine.
They're all
So
working?
Those,
Okay.
so on YouTube, it's working.
Okay.
I'm going to segue us because it's about time for our break. And I just want to say thank you to everyone for having this hard conversation and productive conversation. And it's, yes, Jay.
No, he wants to share.
We are having a break and then we can come back. Yeah. Yes.
Break, I think it would be helpful, just if we could, because that was a hard conversation, it went a lot of different ways, but I think it would be really helpful if people could just identify a couple of takeaways, like what did you take from that conversation, and is there any specific next step that you think is important as a result of it? Go ahead.
MAP proposals need to include SU or SD structures. MAP proposals need to include choice. Or independent or whatever.
What do you mean by that?
Needs to show whether.
Needs to show whether whether on that section of the map there is tuitioning or operating.
So just to be clear, that is a decision that is made by districts. It is not it is not districting. That in current statute, the district decides whether tuitions are operated. So I'm trying to understand, we're not changing whether they operate or tuition here.
Currently, right now, there's there's Ferdinand, there's Westford, there's Essex, and people are either attending a designated school, attending their public school, or they're tuitioning. I think those are the two options. I think the map, currently, we need to include that information in the maps.
So we're saying how we think this would have to work. If we recommend an SD, like a CTE district, we have to say whether we expect that CTE district to be an operating district or a tuitioning district. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I want to hear what Jess, I want to make sure.
Well,
that's
in the
what Jen said.
context of if it's an SU or an SD, if it's a school district, then that it would be different than if it were an SU. But yes, that needs to be.
So if somebody is proposing an SD, they need to specify the operating structure they assume is in that SD.
Yes.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. Yes.
Sure.
Yes.
Could be a pre-K through 8, could be a pre-K through 12, whatever.
Could be a tuition non-operating.
Non-operating.
Could be
Yeah.
Yes, Dave.
I know you want to take a break. Will we have a chance to come back to choice? Because I had my hand up, but then I decided this whole discussion about accountability didn't fit with what I was going to say.
Okay, it seems
and I
like
can wait
Jay
later.
has something to say, and Dave, you also.
Do we want to do two more comments and
Why
then
we-
take
why
a
we-
break? Let's
why
do
we-
that.
what-
We can take a break.
Let's do
That's
two
fine.
more comments and then
Okay.
take a break, and then we'll change subjects.
Okay.
So you two get
do the quality piece, just to point out there's a third area.
We didn't do it, and I felt like it was, Kim, I thought you brought it up quite a bit, but I don't know if there's any action steps around
Okay,
it.
that's fine. I just wanted to,
Yeah.
I think it's helpful to know that there's common agreement that we
Yeah.
are prioritizing student equity, opportunity,
Student
and outcomes.
experience, student experience also.
Okay.
So we can just do it after the break.
Okay,
or
I'll
whatever.
add that as another takeaway, and then the two comments and then a break.
Dave.
Yeah, I mean, I think in addition, it's one thing to have a non-operating district. It's another thing when you have a district that operates a K-8 school and then has choice. And it's hard for me to wrap my head around, especially thinking about trying to create a map that is based on a comprehensive high school with CTE offerings. If we continue to have choice in my town, for example, what does that do to the viability of that map? Like, I have, this is just a, those two. On this topic, I admit to not having a full grasp of how it all works out financially, but I think that's another consideration for us, because in our charge, we're supposed to be looking at elements of cost effectiveness. And so whenever I pay my pretty hefty property tax in my town, it does concern me that I've got a significant number of students who are using that choice, even though there are public schools within the same, like actually within a half an hour any direction. At one point, our town designated a school, and then a couple of years back voted to no longer designate, and now people go wherever. And so when we're talking about trying to build efficiencies, I think of the high school in Royalton. I mentioned this at the last meeting, where there are a little, maybe close to 250, I think was the number that Superintendent Canarney shared with us, and that there were 80 people choosing choice going wherever. When this school's in that area, if we create something, and this is, again, beyond the scope of just the task force, but if in this law we create something where we're saying this is efficient and effective and equitable, but you can take your money and go wherever you want, we've defeated the purpose. Unless I'm wrong, I could be wrong, but I just on its face, just logically, it doesn't make sense to me that we're sending a couple $1 million, a couple $100,000 here, there, elsewhere, and then running the risk of not having enough FTEs for enough students to actually operate an efficient high school. I think that has to be part of our thinking. And it's different. Some places, they just don't have any schools. But in places where we're allowing choice, just because people want it and like it, even though there are, we're trying to make boundaries and maps and account for transportation, that sort of thing, but you can scatter to the wind if you choose.
But I mean, that leads to a conversation
Scott, can you
I'm
ask
sorry.
Because, sorry, I think
I'm sorry.
Dave was going to be next.
Oh, okay, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't think anybody was next.
Well, Jay and I didn't chat, but what I was thinking before actually runs counter to what you said, and that is that I'm personally hoping that the parents who enjoy choice in 90 or so towns in Vermont can have that preserved, because that has worked for their families. And I'm hoping that, at least personally, whatever map we recommend, if we're talking about preserving choice, not creating greater choice, perhaps, but preserving the choice that we have, I think that's very important. I think we'll do some damage if we don't preserve school choice where it now exists.
Politically damage?
No, nothing about politics. Thinking about mom and dad and where you, with your 15-year-old or your 5-year-old, you now have choice about where your child goes to school. I would not want to take that away from them. That's my point.
I think
I think Scott was
Okay. Yeah, I would just,
And then
in the last 2 years, the legislature, I get your concern. There is a moratorium on new independent schools to become approved, and we've recently narrowed down the number of eligible schools from 46 to 19 to get at what you're talking about there. But I mean, if you take that conversation, further down the road, I mean, effectively where that leads to is state imposition on communities and basically forcing them to change their mix of operation and tuition. And I mean, that's where you're going with that conversation, and I think that's a really hard conversation for the state to have and for those 90 local communities to have.
Okay, we've got Jay, we've got Rebecca, Kim, and
You're trying to take a break.
Which I totally get. It is my turn, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally get that. But I sat at a meeting with, it was the White River Valley SU board, and I think it was Orange Southeast, Randolph. Their board attended as well. And they came to sort of approach White River Valley to say, hey, maybe we should think about getting together. And it was sort of one of those preliminary, like, speed dating things where people are going around and visiting each other's school boards. And the question of choice came up, and that's where this discussion about, well, 80 of our kids are choosing something else, and they were talking about that in a positive way, that they had that choice. And then they asked the Randolph folks about their choice, and they were like, well, we don't have choice. So I think when we say there are 90 towns that enjoy choice, and Dave, I respectfully disagree that I think part of this process is we got to put a plan in place that everybody has to follow. If we keep allowing people to choose their own adventure, the part of this that is about fiscal discipline and being careful stewards of tax dollars goes out the window if everybody can just pick. And any discussion that we're going to have about equity when my town has choice and your town doesn't, well, too bad for you. That's a problem, I think, that when we start to talk about consolidation, the idea is that we're making things equitable for every town and every district. And that's a rough one to handle. And that's, again, why we're dealing with a lot of the public concern that we're dealing with. And, yeah.
I think it was Kim and Chris and then Rebecca.
I'll be fast.
Okay.
No, you go first.
I was just going to say that I think the protection of choice for whom and at what cost, and if that choice means that the lower grades are having fewer and fewer opportunities, that family and their age or their student and their preparedness for wherever they're going for their choice could be compromised. And without accountability in the system, again, whatever that governance is, we don't know. All we know is that cuts are happening at those younger, important ages and experiences in ways that are changing the dynamic of equity for all students by protecting few. And that isn't to say that a system, can't figure this out, because we've had important public-private partnerships that can be held accountable to the same student outcomes and experiences in my mind. And that partially solves for what you're saying. But that, to Jay's point, I don't understand how we can do equity if there's not a continuum of accountability pre-K-12 for students, and how we can possibly do equity in a cost-managed and efficient manner if that is not controlled from accountability standpoint.
Thank you, Kim. Chris?
I'm just thinking that.
Yeah.
I actually think I'm a little more confused than when I walked in here, which is good. That's fine. I mean, I've enjoyed this conversation. I guess I would just go back to the public's school choice, and I tend to agree with Dave and I think Scott. My worry is that if we take away choice, some of these towns will go away. And some towns that some towns in the SUs I've worked for, people move to those towns for school choice. And if you take that away and force them somewhere, these towns are going to go away. And then we're going to have a funding problem because there won't be anyone there to pay the property taxes to pay the education. So I am for keeping school choice, and I am for keeping local control and letting people choose. Because I don't want to see our towns, our small towns go away.
I need to come back to what I said at the very beginning of the meeting, which is when we look at this in a fear-based perspective, we lose the opportunity to be forward-thinking and to plan for what could be best, what a better system could look like. And so when we look at a situation and say this will or this could or this is the thing that is keeping that town together, it's really dangerous, and it's dangerous for people to hear that from us too. And I think part of our job is to figure out what we could look like. We're talking about 10 years down the road, and how do we get there? And so I hear what you're saying, right? I hear that the unknown makes us want to hold on to what we have today because it's known. Whether it's great or whether it's horrible, it's known. But we have to be able to let go of it a little bit to just think about what's possible and think about what we can do that's better. And just because somebody loves choice today doesn't mean that what they're going to be offered tomorrow isn't better. And so to just say it's a no-go out front, that means we're not exploring all opportunities out there. So I don't want us to go down that. That's what's happening across the state, and that fear, when it spreads, stops us from being able to see what's possible. So sorry, I jumped in the middle. I know it's Rebecca and then Scott.
It's a big statement. So Rebecca and then Jay. Did you still have?
Yeah, I just, Scott, were you in there?
I think
Rebecca's next, and then.
Okay, we're not going to get a break.
I know. So be it.
I think going back to, I love my colleague who constantly cites the Constitution. The legislature provides for education unless it decides otherwise. So when we talk about local control, keep in mind that that is something that the legislature has allowed communities to do. I just think we need to remember how this works. I think the choice one is one where everybody who uses that, we should be asked to provide our evidence, because I really can think, it works very differently in different parts of the state. In my area, because it's a public school, private school, public school, private school, there's really no choice for the public school students who would have universal public school choice, but because it's all intermixed, that is off the table, because they can't universal public school choice, which is supposed to be a statewide benefit, into an independent school. That's just not the way it works. At the same time, I think down in your area, Leland and Gray, struggling, and the only school in the region, and if that school goes, we have no place to educate most kids, but also most disadvantaged kids and most kids with disabilities. And they happen to be sitting close to an independent school that serves no kids with disabilities and no kids on IEPs. How is that fair? And how is that choice? Because clearly some kids don't have the choice of going to that independent school. And not all independent schools are the same. And I think we need to say that. And not all public schools are the same. But the public schools are part of a system that we're trying to make work. We actually can't touch the independent schools. And so I think we need to think really hard about that. And what we're seeing, I think we also need to talk about what happens when we do nothing. And this is why I feel like we have to have this conversation, how painful it is. I mean, you mentioned your SU. They've already lost 2 public schools. And when you lose public schools, what you lose is that safety net and that support for kids in those communities. When I look at this data that you've just put out, the public schools actually providing education at a lower price, than the independent schools in that region. There's lots of things we need to consider here. And when we lose those public schools, because 10 kids have been pulled out here to do this special thing and 10 kids there to do this special thing, what the kids in that town lose is access to a robust public school, a public community school, if that's what they wanted. So some people's choice may actually be taking away other people's choice as well.
Scott and then Jay.
Yeah. So a few things have been thrown out here. Just wanted to, all of our independent schools, they go through they're subject, we can touch them. There are 2,200 rules. They have to reapply every 5 years. They are touchable. I mean, I could bring my data, but I think it's pretty clear that independent schools receive less in tuition than's being spent on kids across the state. It's not a criticism, it's fine. As far as costs, though, to operate a system, what you were talking about earlier, Jay, I mean, in a foundation system, which we're moving to, the cost.
Whoa.
We only move to if we
Whoa.
create a map.
Yeah, right.
Hold on.
Yeah.
So,
But, I mean,
10 of Act 73.
we're going to do our work, and we're going to, in a foundation system, the cost of operation is not tied to the number or a combination of schools in the state. It's tied to the number of kids and the uniqueness of those kids. So the cost of the system is the same regardless of the composition of the schools, public, independent, large, big, small,
oh my gosh,
medium.
that's so not true, Scott.
That is so true. That is so true. In a foundation, it's...
People need to bring their data. People need
That is so true.
People need to bring data.
It's Jay next.
Yeah, I was just going to go back to what Chris said, and I get people passionate about choice, and people do, I mean, they always look at schools, period, when they're deciding where to live. But to take that argument further, then why doesn't every district get choice? You know, it's like if it's the best model and it's good for everybody, why doesn't everybody get it? And that's the problem I have. It's like some do, some don't, and I get it. If we are afraid to, this might be a local control issue. If we're afraid to pass a law that says, no, we're not going to have that willy-nilly Wild West sort of approach to this. We're going to have, this is what you're allowed to do. These are your constraints. Work within those constraints with a foundation formula. Fine. But if we're going to allow some towns to do that and not others, I don't know how we can even talk about equity.
Thank you.
Okay, so.
Kim, and then I think Sue.
And Scott, with all due respect, the law was negotiated to have St. Johnsbury Academy and Linden Institute not part of the foundation formula, which will mean any sending will have left only that which
Because the CTE, there's no CTE weight in there. Where's CTE? How do you get paid?
Interestingly,
all of our public
CTE
CTEs get to
funding
set
is
their
for
tuition.
11 and 12. So nonetheless, I think the thing that's important to say, though, as you're saying, it's the money's going to follow the student under foundation formula with the amount prescribed in the law. That is not true for students attending St. Johnsbury Academy and Linden Institute as negotiated in the law at the end of the session.
Scott, go ahead. You want to rebut?
Yeah, I mean, this is a simple, in the law right now, none of our CTEs, none of them, public or independent, are restricted from charging tuition to the students that they receive. That is current law in the state of Vermont right now. There was nothing in that law that would restrict public CTEs from continuing to set their tuition for receiving students. It would have been nice if there was a weight put in that would have solved the whole problem, but the weight was not put in, and because St. Johnsbury Academy and LI operate a CTE center that needs money to operate that CTE center, they were also allowed to set their tuition going forward, just like the publics do. That's it.
That's actually not how public schools are funded in Act 73.
It's how CTEs are funded.
And the difference is also that St. Johnsbury and Linden are going to be able to charge that CTE rate for every student who's enrolled because they're the only two comprehensive independent schools.
Because we are not allowed to charge different rates by SBE rule.
I'm not, which is a rule, not a statute, and statute supersedes rule. And that's great, but that means that you are getting a higher rate for all students, including students who never set a foot in a CTE class. And that is just a different level of funding than, say, Danville's going to have access to. It just is.
So I'm
Pass a CTE weight, simple.
For students who never take a CTE course. Scott,
No. For CTE students, pass a CTE weight.
So I just want to, I failed at one thing, because we were going to try not to have this turn into a debate, which it now is a debate.
It's hard not to.
The intention of this part of the conversation was to surface some of the hard stuff so that you all can do your work together. And I think it's still healthy to have the debate, because this is what you all are bringing to the table and thinking about as you're wrestling with these maps. I think I got a couple of things out of this that directly impact the map making. So I just want to say them back and make sure that this makes sense to all of you, and then we'll move on. So one is that it seems like it's a decision of the group that when you're making mapping proposals, that it does need to articulate the kinds of structures and specify some of the, whether it's SUs, SDs, or the tuitioning is involved, that has to be named. And then I think the other thing, there's a lot of talk about making sure that we're keeping the impact on students and shared accountability on mind. It feels like the template you all created, if you all are faithful to that template, that you're going to have a lot of that conversation. There's a plug put in that we need evidence about why recommendations make sense. So for example, if school choice is incorporated in a map, supplying evidence about why that makes sense. And then I think a recommendation for the report as a whole to the legislature is to name what happens if we do nothing. Because there's a lot of fear of change, and why do we need to do this exercise? And so I think incorporating that in the report feels important. So those were a couple takeaways. If those all make sense to people.
They do. You said something that I wanted to circle back to. If folks are faithful to the template, I mean, I think we have to have a shared understanding that if you're presenting a map, you're filling out the template, right? And you're,
yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
I think that's later in our agenda.
It is, but she brought it up.
So the only other housekeeping thing is, Jay, you handed out some papers. Can you make sure you email that to Chrissy so that it gets posted so that anybody who is remote can see it?
Absolutely.
We didn't talk about it, but we just have to make sure that information is shared.
Will do.
Thank you.
Okay, we're moving.
I would just like to make a point on that note. I think that concern, it's actually, it's not a concern, but it's not true. I mean, I'm not sure what, it seems like it's a biased note.
We don't have data.
Well, yeah, we're going to put something up there like that. We should probably bring some data out and actually, like, it's a pretty biased comment.
Which
I think data out because they haven't given it to
Concerns
us.
that costs of independent schools are higher than public schools. That one? So,
Yeah.
But yeah.
oh, you take it off, Karen.
Was that related to if we did the foundation form? I mean, my comment was related to the law, if we did the foundation formula, because you were speaking about the foundation formula. So that was my response, and it was related to the law.
If you go to the long tuition form and just pick any year, what you can do is you can do a pivot, and you can look at how much we spend on average on, I would just do it by grade level, because it obviously varies by grade level. So sort for secondary schools and do a pivot, you can see what we spend per student on a student who is tuitioned to an independent school and what we spend on average per student who's tuitioned to a public school. That is publicly available data.
So is the allowable tuition chart.
Jen, did you want to say something? No? Okay. So can we move on to the next item on the agenda, which is at...
Just to state, if you didn't get a break and you need one, take one, and sorry, we're all just going to have to go as we go.
11:05. It's now 11:21. Review and adopt the final mapping template. And Sue is going to lead that discussion.
So Beth and Jay, they actually took some of the problem statements and turned them into 6 outcomes for the maps to facilitate, and that's on page 3 and 4 of the map. So those are the 2 changes that were made. And also, it doesn't show up on the printed version, but there's a recommendation that we also add an executive summary to the beginning of the map.
Well, beginning around. Sorry. Can you say that one more time? You're talking about the
template?
The template.
Yep, there are 2 changes on pages 3 and 4. there were some updates, and then a suggestion that we add an executive summary.
And this is attached, if anybody's watching, you have access to it on the documents. I think it's, I'm trying to remember what the tab says at the bottom.
So I'll let you all lead whatever the process is for just approving those changes.
Okay, so,
I
yeah.
just asked what those changes were on pages 3 and 4.
Yeah, can you be more specific about the changes?
Sure. So at the last meeting, Jay and Beth did some work, and on page 3, there was a list of about 14 things that they recommended consolidating into these six core issues.
Consolidation.
I think at the meeting, at the last meeting, we consolidated into 3.
Right.
And then between the meetings, it was expanded out from those 3 to 6. So it's those 6 is kind of where we landed. If people agree to those, because those were not presented at the last meeting.
Okay, awesome. So take a look at those on page 3. Any questions on those? Wendy, do you have a question?
Not a question, I don't have questions on those, but I have a suggestion, a separate suggestion.
Why don't we go over page 4 first, and then we'll come back to you.
Page 3.
Yeah, page 3 looks good to me.
For framing it in the affirmative, that is helpful for the
Yeah,
way
it is.
I think about what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
And then on page 4, at the last meeting, Beth and Jay had articulated some, from that long list that you all had come up with, some decision-making considerations. So we tried to form this in a table that, in a way that made sense. So I don't know, Beth or Jay, if you want to say anything more about these.
I say the only thing that's different from the last meeting is the third one up from the bottom, is something that your team.
Yes, our team recommended this
The
based
others were
on
ones we had.
public comment we were hearing, and just a recognition that there's a lack of diversity around this table, and people through public comment had expressed concerns about this, and so we felt like that was a way to kind of honor that perspective. Need to build a system that reduces harm for marginalized students, including but not limited to students with disabilities, students experiencing poverty, or students of color.
Okay, everyone okay with those changes as well? Wonderful. And Wendy, I know you wanted to say something.
Yes, thank you. And I think I brought this up previously. When we look at the final check of legislatively mandated considerations, and these are our official parameters, I think it's really important that we at some point talk more about how we define these things, because what's happened in some of our conversations is we've said we don't know if the map complies with these. But at a minimum, please, I suggest that instead of a yes or no, that we have a range, like a 1 through 5, for example, so that we have at least some differential. Some maps will meet one of these criteria more than another one. It's not, they aren't just black and white or yes and no. So in this middle column, instead of having it be a yes or no, just have a range, 1 through 5.
Are folks okay with that?
1 is not at all, 5 is
whatever we want. Yeah, I would say 5 would be the yes and 1 would be the no, but
then there's some gradients in between.
Yes.
Okay. Rebecca?
Just an observation, this is something that's always been true. We always used to say our goals are cost effectiveness, quality, and access, and those 3 are incompatible, so we should all just assume that no plan is going to hit all 3 of those.
Same in healthcare.
Same in healthcare.
Right.
Thank you, yes, good perspective. And actually, consolidation in healthcare doesn't always bring down cost either. Nor does choice.
Go ahead, John. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on adding an N, which just says practical.
On the checklist?
Well, there is a practicality, there's a, so far as feasible, that modifies some of these. I think because this is drawn from statute, that it ought to be just what was required in statute.
But isn't there a little clause
As
in
practical,
the statute?
There is.
to the extent practical.
To the extent
But-
practical.
Some part.
That's
Yeah,
why we're not getting
But I don't
that.
think it modifies everything, but if it does, sure, let's add that. I thought it just modified a couple of things.
That was about
This
size.
is a district size.
That was the 4,000 to 8,000 to the extent practical. Yeah.
Jen, would your concern be addressed on page 9, the evidence of overall feasibility of successful implementation? Would that cover it?
Yes.
Thank you. Sure.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you. So,
So it sounds like the changes are accepted, and the one additional change is to shift from yes or no on the characteristics to a range of 1 to 5. Does everybody approve of that?
if everyone is in agreement, I would entertain a motion to accept the template as written.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Any opposed?
Yeah, any opposed? I didn't hear a lot of ayes. Okay. Any abstentions? Then the template is passed. And we are now going to move on to the discussion about the Boards of Cooperative Education Services, also known as BOCES, also known as, sometimes they're called other things, right, as well?
ESAs, intermediate units, there are a whole variety
An
of different
ESA
names.
is what?
Education Service Agency. and
Education Service
IU is
Agency.
an intermediate unit. They have different names in different places. Same
They're-
construct, same principle.
Same construct, same principle, different names. In this case, again, BOCES is Boards of Cooperative Education Services. And I am going to introduce the folks who have been working very diligently on this, Jen Botts-Jorns and Rebecca Holcomb. And Jen, are you going to be presenting today to us?
Sure.
Okay, wonderful. So you can have the floor.
Okay. Can we get that PowerPoint up? I'm not sure So if you recall, at the last meeting, there was a presentation from one of our colleagues in Vermont about BOCES. And then at the end of the meeting, I was online, and the recommendation was, can you dive a little further into this? And I luckily had the opportunity to do this. You will see a 70-plus page document which has in-depth research and hot links of studies about the effectiveness of BOCES. So I invite you to look at that, and we're going to do, after I zip through this presentation, perhaps we'll have a break, and then we'll, in groups, in pairs, look at this. So this is a regional services map. It's not a governance map yet. Next slide, please. So BOCES is, and you all have this in hard copy, and what this proposal is, I'm calling it the BIMS option, okay? Like, educators like silly acronyms, so I'm giving you a BIMS option. Part 1 is BOCES, and Part 2 is intentional mergers that are strategic. So we're going to dive into this BOCES piece, and we haven't yet made the map for the intentional mergers that are strategic. Next slide, please. So this is the BIMS model. 5 regional education services called Board of Cooperative Education Services, and then intentional mergers that are strategic. They're aligned with evidence-based criteria, local input, contingent on access to construction aid. This governance map is going to be forthcoming. And as you recall, what I said earlier about the difference between Essex Westford and any paid choice are so far apart that it's really important that we are intentional and strategic about our physical Sharpie map of the state. Next slide, please. The benefits to this model of the BIMS option is lower cost, higher quality, more consistent opportunities statewide, and then fair access. Next slide, please. It's consistent with research, and again, there's a lot of, you can go on these online, and AI can help you and look at evidence-based research. It's consistent with the research on what improves outcomes. It creates regional resilience, so you don't log on to the educational development program in Chittenden County and see Kristen Kortemach offering the math workshop for people to do first instruction for special ed kids and have access to that if you're in one part of the state. And if you're in another part of the state, you don't even know the assessments for math that are going to help improve outcomes. There's less risk and less chaos because there's research on what has been done and what works, and it gives local folks the ability to leverage and use their own expertise. Next slide. So, part one, BOCES. What is BOCES? Next. And there's a hot link if you're online. You can look at this research document, and Rebecca did a lot of this, and I just appreciate the looking at actual programs and studies. And as part of it, I spoke to a colleague of mine from grad school who is head of one of these units in Pennsylvania and also was president of the national group that runs BOCES. And it's pretty comprehensive, the work that happens and the ability to mitigate the access to opportunities that are unfair and inconsistent in our school, and the lack of economies of scale, efficient governance, cost effectiveness. So we need to have a coherent structure. Next slide, please. Again, there's research, there's a safe service, there's a shared service model. It's higher quality, and if you are in the field and sitting in a principal or a superintendent's office and you've been working for the last 5, 10, 15 years, you get a litany of acts and rules and laws that we need, that come down the pike and we need to address. Most recently, the literacy one, there was one for BOCES, there was a special ed one, and then you go all the way back to 2000, there was early intervention. And so your head is spinning, and if you're a small district, but you're not able to have capacity, so you get together and try to make this work. If you're part of a larger organization with more funding, you're able to make all these work. And then the next year, another legislative act comes through. So it will allow us to scale some of this really important work that we've done, which we're not really meeting. And then next slide, please. Why BOCES? You pool resources, you have better impact for local dollars through shared services, and it's a cost-effective on-demand services, and it just will build capacity. Next slide, please. This is the map of the 5 regions. 2, 3, 4, 5, and those are based on professional colleagues who are working right now together. You'll see when you go down the interstate, right where we are, the reason there's that blip is the blue is part of this district, which ends up going north, and then those 3 reds are an interstate district, which is totally different, but they go with the southeast region. Next map, please. So here's an example of how a BOCES can be cost effective. This is called a shared business services, and you have a full stack central office business. You can do your financial systems cooperatively with the BOCES, and they can help and support it. Purchasing technology. This gentleman that I spoke with in Pennsylvania talked about how they've got one area in the state that runs an IT program for business software, and everyone in the state uses that because it's effective, but it's built by the local people, by what they need. It's not an outside or the AOE deciding what to do with that. Next slide, please. And again, all of this is outlined in the document, the big fat 69-page document. Professional development. We have problems in our state, and I just mentioned a math example of ability to teach first instruction for special ed students and the inconsistency. We also have issues with recruiting and retaining employees. When I was at my last district, we had up to 40% of our people on provisional licenses. When I was in Chittenden County, we had maybe 2 over my 5 years in the central office. So that creates inequities. The professional development will allow for specific programs for recruitment, retaining, in addition to everything from literacy to pedagogy. Next slide, please. One of the folks in the audience here is one of my board members when I was at Rivendell, and special education costs are incredibly expensive, and we're not meeting the needs of our children. What BOCES allows is for pooling resources and training so we get quality, good instruction, and then we also can address the students who have very unique, low incidence, high need disabilities. Next slide, please, is another slide on special education. And oftentimes, if you're on a school board or you have anything to do with schools, you will hear people say, we've got these 2 or 3 young folks, they're wonderful young folks, but they may need medical or toileting services, they may have high intensive needs. We don't have, because we're a small school or district, the ability to do this. What BOCES allows you to do is pool this. St. Johnsbury School District, the public school district, Karen Conroy just this past year developed her own alternative education program for children who were experiencing trauma. Doing that alone is very isolated, and you don't get the expertise that if you can collaborate with it. And you all know special education is a huge cost. Next slide, please. Am I going too fast?
No, it's good.
Okay. So the goals, it's to improve access, outcomes, and have high quality and cost-effective therapeutic programs and services. And it's to offer high-quality PD, support regional supervisory union and district staffing needs, pools of experts, and it's responsive to programs and services in a cost-effective manner. And the next slide is a timeline of how you would need to implement something like this. You would set it up, you would have core services, you would expand, and then you would have an audit built in. And in the black on the bottom, if you do something like this hastily and poorly, it will backfire. And you will see some of the Act 46 forced mergers who hastily come to the table, and they're in by name, but they're not getting the benefits of some of the mergers that now have athletics or world language for all their children, which didn't exist before.
And sometimes they get divorced.
Yeah. So our next slide it shows you Vermont is the most rural state in the country. Why do we have small schools and small districts? Because we're a rural state. 66% of our people live, I mean, how many folks in this room live on a dirt road?
Not anymore.
They did. Okay, next slide, please. And then, which states have BOCES? And look at this data, okay? Education less expensive than Vermont. All these other states they have a BOCES which provides these bundled, high-quality services. Next slide, please. So that's part 1. Part 2 is the intentional mergers that are strategic. And as I told folks before, I was involved in 2 different mergers. One was in very rural school choice, Northeast Kingdom. The other was in Chittenden County. They took time, they were long, they were complicated. Next slide, please. So I want to focus on this word, I keep saying this, practical. Ability to be done or put into practice successfully. 3 to 4 years, up to 8 years, if there's a lawsuit, it takes to merge. It's not slow, and you can't take a Sharpie to a map. You can. It's easy to pull out a map and take a Sharpie, but we need to be thoughtful. Next slide, please. What are intentional mergers? They review the local configurations, the relationships, the governance, the geography. They receive input from local stakeholders. They provide support, timeline, incentive, and deadlines, and they use research. When you look at the current mergers from Act 46, the ones that are successful were location alike. I was in an area and all the K through 8 operating and high school choice clumped together. If you look at Addison County, they were all around, for instance, Middlebury Union High School. And so you had situations like that. Go to the next slide, please. What an intentional and strategic implementation of a map does is it allows groups, like this was in the news a week or so ago, about districts that are coming together right now saying, if we came together, what would we do, what could we do? Next slide, please. And then if you're involved in research, you know that you have to have a plan for implementation. And I live in the St. Johnsbury area, and Allen Lumber was a local lumber company, and RK Miles bought them out. And it took them 5 years, and now they've got this beautiful new facility, but it was planned and timed, and the town of St. Johnsbury just agreed in the select board to do something with that property. But my point is, it takes time. Businesses, it takes time, and it needs to follow a process. There needs to be a stage plan. You need to name what's driving it. You need to have the policies in order. When we merged, putting together our policies was time-consuming. Next slide, please. And if you, and I'm not going to do this right now, but if you're in this document, if you click on these links, they are all examples of school districts or regions where this played out and it was successful. You need to target mergers where districts are small. There's so when you look at the savings, the research on savings for mergers, there's it goes to a certain point and then it doesn't decrease savings. And I'll get to this later, but you also need to track. So this is the structure you need to follow. Okay, next slide, please. So what happened with Act 46? There were successful mergers. They were complicated regions. There was reluctance. There was anger. There were some divorces. We had districts who were merged and then pulled out of the merger. There were limitations based on configurations, and there were mergers that happened without buy-in or benefit. And the reason why this is so hard in our state is because we are so small and we are so rural. We are the most rural state. And if you look at the research on what Maine did with their consolidation, they had a lot of challenges. And I say that because us just taking a Sharpie to a map needs to be strategic and intentional. So the next slide, please. And this gets to our conversation earlier, is the tuition voucher non-operating school district question and changes. They're linked to the governance map. So the map, it limits consolidation. The impact closes public schools. It has, and that's the case. If you look at Act 46 and you look at the Rochester region, there were 4 schools, two elementary, middle schools, and 2 high schools, and now there's just 2 schools, 1 elementary, and so there were 2 schools which were closed. And that was hard. It was difficult work. It was challenging. And the district that I was in, we closed one of our middle schools, Gilman, and it was hard and it was challenging. But I can say in the end, there ended up being better outcomes and opportunities for kids. So next slide.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah. If you could go back, please.
Yeah.
Sorry, Scott, I'm going really fast.
No, that's
I'm
fine.
throwing a lot of stuff at you.
You use the tuition voucher.
Right.
Many vouchers?
We don't have vouchers in Vermont.
So-
What are you talking?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So when I was at Kingdom East, we, and this is a district that tuitioned all high school folks.
Right.
Students would fill out a little form, and then that would go to the school, and it would come back, and what we sent, we called a voucher. So I'm using that in a record keeping.
A record keeping. Oh, okay.
So, and I apologize.
Okay.
Because it
Just wanna
does
make
have,
sure.
it does have a national
Connotation,
definition.
yeah.
Thank you. Next
Okay.
slide, please. So this on the left is at the last meeting, Governor Cape's proposal from 2006 was shared. And that proposal said, all right, we should take all these supervisory unions and make them school districts. So on the left was the map, and you could see that there's many more districts and governance units than on the right. So you see the change. And if you go to the next slide, it will show you the supervisory unions and the supervisory districts between 2006 and 2025. So you can see there are fewer straight districts or supervisory unions, and there are more districts. This is just data. I'm not making any assumptions or suggesting anything. I'm just saying that the state of Vermont, folks have worked really hard and had very difficult conversations to change the governance to where we are now. And moving forward, it's going to be equally as hard, and we need to be thoughtful about that. Next slide, please. And then the change over time from 2006 to present, you see on the top chart the change in the number of schools. So you see that some schools did close, and I mentioned that part in central Vermont. I can tell you of the Lunenburg one, Underhill ID closed. And in all those cases, again, it was hard work, it was local, and people were thoughtful. And on the bottom one, you will see the number of school districts has decreased by 56% in this time. So there has been consolidation. And again, this is just data for you to see. Next slide. Yeah, go ahead.
Can we just pause on this for 1 second?
Yes.
Number of school districts.
not supervisory districts.
Yeah,
Right,
what
those
are
are
some
school
districts that we've lost? I can't think of any.
So where I was
Okay.
at Mount
Yeah.
Mansfield, Jericho was a school district, Underhill was a school district, Richmond was a school
right,
district.
okay.
Now they're all Mount Mansfield.
Got it.
Act 46.
Got it.
Right.
We lost
Where
about
I
300.
taught, it was, each of the 6 elementary schools was a separate independent school district. They are now combined into one
So
school
they didn't,
district.
sorry, so they didn't get lost, they got merged into a large,
Consolidated.
But
consolidated.
they're not governance units. in
Got
this.
it.
So-
They don't have
so
separate boards and separate.
Heinsberg and St. George and Williston
Are
all
now
have their
part
own
of-
school board. Now they've got one school board.
Got it, thank you.
Other questions?
Like Essex Town, Essex Junction, the high school,
Westford.
Westford all
Yeah.
had
Right.
their own boards. They were each smaller than the collective board, which had proportional representation and 10 people.
And my point in doing this is to say, we have done this work. It's been hard, and we know how and what to do. We need to be thoughtful about it. Next slide, please. So, governance change takes time. It takes away from teaching and learning. When you are an administrator working through governance, you need governance changes. It takes a lot of work. And you know what? The students are coming to school tomorrow. And you still have to educate them. So you're flying changing the plane as you're flying it, or whatever what is that?
Building it.
Yeah.
And it's controversial and hard work, and there needs to be a local context. Okay, next slide, please. And I had a different way of saying this, but I like the BIMS acronym, which is why intentional mergers that are strategic, and I apologize for that hokiness of it. But, and we want to present a specific map which has the actual maps at a later meeting, and with local input, optimize high schools at least 350, and the data supports this. 1,500 students up to site research, and this gets back to that practical part of the legislation. Be mindful of transition costs, and that it's contingent on construction aid, and it in terms of expanding school choice, it's inextricably linked to the map. Next slide, please.
What is 1,500 students?
Is that, is that for like
Is that for the
SUSD?
So for the governance unit, I'll show you a slide that consolidates. There's this group called Duncan and Duncombe and Yinger have done a lot of research about Pennsylvania, New York, some of our states that have large urban areas and rural places, and a lot of times people say, and there's no comparison to Vermont, because Burlington is urban, but it's not New York City or Philadelphia. However, in the rural areas, it is similar. The rural Poconos or Canandaigua County in New York, you're talking about school districts with 80 kids or 120 kids. And so you can look at that research and really see, has it saved money? What's the optimal size? And that's where you look at that threshold where it saves money once you get to a certain point. And then once you get over another threshold, you're not saving money and it's not as cost effective. Next slide, please.
In terms of district size.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the strongest economies occur when very small districts combine 300 students and get to 1,500 to 3,000. And once you get above that, the research doesn't, the research review that I did doesn't say that you see substantial financial savings. Rebecca, were you
And
gonna
just
say
to
something?
emphasize, they also talk a lot about transition costs. So you may save money over the long haul, but you may not save money in the short term because there are very significant transition costs. And this is inextricable from the BOCES because, and I think we see this in Vermont, when people were doing governance reform for the last 8 years, it was hard to keep your eye on the ball around instructional improvement. And so we see that larger umbrella as essential to making sure we don't lose sight of kids and don't lose sight of our educators who are working really hard every day as we try to think about some of these other issues.
Again, there are hot links to the actual studies, and you can look at these, and you can just look at the abstract to see the summary, which really informs. And for me, I like to do, like I want to teach kids to read based on the research and how to make kids learn how to read. Same thing with governance changes. So.
Can I also say one thing?
Yeah.
And I think we could run this against the data on where the public schools are closing right now, and it's in those, many of them are in those smaller districts. There's a couple bigger districts that have taken schools offline, but comparatively few. It is in rural areas, and I understand people feel like choice is bringing in more population, but the reality is.
Excuse the interruption. All Oxbow teachers, please report to the cafeteria. Again, all Oxbow teachers, please report to the cafeteria.
Can you say that again?
These are rural areas that are, many of them are part of, they're experiencing this larger pattern of the sort of declining population in rural areas as people are moving to urban centers. And so we are trying to figure out how to be mindful of that challenge and make sure we don't lose access to public schools in places where kids, frankly, really depend on those schools for everything from social services to access to higher ed. And food and everything else.
And again, we are the most rural state in the country. And so we can't forget that. So again, the school size, the district size, there's research and there's links to this. And then looks at the next one, which is a nice visual, which shows you, and again, this is Duncan and Yinger's research. Oops, sorry.
Was it the?
So when you look at consolidation, there's different results for low income students than for high income. So if you have an area and you consolidate to a larger district and it's less poverty, there's more success than smaller districts with higher poverty. And the research, again, there's an article there. And then the distance and travel time is significant because that leads to cost. And again, it gets into the fairness for people who can drive their kids to school or not. Yeah.
Can you talk more about specific travel times, like 40 minutes, 1 hour? Those are thresholds that I've heard from folks.
Yeah, and this is similar to class size because, and my answer is, let's click on that.
Okay.
Because
well, I think it also, it's more nuanced than that, though. It is travel time, but for example, I went to a meeting, Scott and I went to a meeting up in Blue Mountain, and one of the things that the community said was the challenge is if we have to go far away and there's only one bus coming back, if it comes back, that 5 o'clock bus, and leaves kids in the middle of town, they still have no way to get home. It's not like they can walk to a city bus or walk home. And so it actually, just structurally, if you aren't really planning for that, you actually become the barrier to access. Because even if they have a bus, just the lack of ability to get from that bus to home becomes a barrier to participation in any extracurriculars, any after-school activities, things like that. So, and in terms of the bus run, I know districts, I used to work actually in this SU, we ran the number of buses we needed to run to try to keep our bus rides shorter, but there are some real practical limits once your distance is quite great.
Yes. And that's a situation in transit, generally, the being able to get back. But I'm just really, it would be really nice to have a number like 40 minutes or an hour, just a top number that we could say.
We will do some research.
Okay, thanks.
That's a great question, and I will tell you that in rural districts, the ridership is very low, and we run these big, huge school buses. And in my dream world, I would take the time to rethink transportation about smaller vehicles, shorter distances. So it's more complicated, but we can get back to you.
This also goes back to Jay's point. Like, it's much easier to provide transportation if you're concentrating on a center. You're trying to move to one place than if you're trying to move to 20 places.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
All right, next slide, please. And there's a visual on the left, and it shows you that high schools of at least 350 and target, they're the ones where you start to see the achievement improve. And you see on the right-hand side is an example of a smaller school and what they can offer, and the left side, science classes, for instance, or art, or music, or athletics, or whatever.
And I think also one of the things the BOCES could support, and Vermont has done a tremendous amount of work, for example, around the Vermont Virtual Learning Collaborative. So districts can donate, 20% of an FTE and get 20 kids access to a buffet of courses that are offered synchronously by real Vermont teachers. There are ways to try to address this, but there is a challenge. If you only have one math teacher, and you don't get along with them, it is going to affect how you feel about math. So there are advantages. After about 350, you don't get these same efficiencies of scale or the lower costs associated with expanding breadth that you see. in those other settings.
Is that number specific to high schools, or is that?
This is high schools. We're just talking about high schools. We're not talking about elementary school.
Because high schools in general, you have that menu of options. There are, my experience has shown that that is true also at elementary schools. Maybe you have a language immersion program or an enrichment program or a unified sports program. And so the larger school can provide those, but the younger grades, it's not as diverse and comprehensive.
Okay.
Next slide, please.
Kim, do you have a...
I was just going to ask if at another time, with the expertise at the table, we might be able to help inform what those experiences would optimally be in the middle levels, since that idea of central middle is in our law and regional high school in our law. So when we, for another time and a further conversation, I'm deeply appreciating the expertise that came to this, and I'm thinking you could do.
And one of the challenges with that research is high school is generally 9th through 12th grade. Right. The middle years, you got one district is 5 through 8, another is a junior high, which is 7 and 8. You even have some 7, 8, 9, and so the research, there's not as much research on those grade levels to tease that out. There's a lot of research about high schools and about district consolidation and rural areas.
And I have to say to any teacher who might be out there listening, this is one example, and it is a pretty significant simplification, and there are many things that districts do, particularly in rural areas, to try to achieve some of the benefits of scale. And BOCES came up over and over again. If you have smaller schools, in that range, the kinds of things that BOCES can do to extend opportunities at rural high schools are actually quite significant. So down the road, I mean, we were talking about, an advanced science course. If you were block scheduling, as some of our rural high schools do, you could have a BOCES itinerant teacher who came in and did physics and went to different schools to do it. You can't do it for a 50-minute period, but if you knew you were going to this region to do it, you could. So it takes a little bit of coordination at a higher level, but there are ways to make sure that we're giving kids those options that are sort of creative uses of pooling of resources. Those are the kinds of things that a BOCE in a rural area might choose to develop and spend some time on. If you were up in Chittenden County, a BOCE there might really focus on English language learners. You might focus on English language learners in a rural area. The incidence is scarcer, so it would be a different kind of support. So you would need rural-specific supports for some of those kids. So the point is, how do you understand where people are and then try to figure out how to help them be the best they can be where they are? That's the logic here.
And again, we're not suggesting we do this. We're offering an option, and then we're laying out the research and what we looked at, so people can say, okay, what do we know? Next slide, please. And then this looks at districts, and what it says is very small districts with 300 pupils or less that merged, you saw the cost savings, 31%, and larger districts, you saw less savings, but you did see savings, and that goes, the graph, I have a graph of it. I did put it in here. The slide presentation was too long already. So, and then the next slide. And then, in summary, I just whipped through a whole bunch of stuff. Next slide, please. So this is an option. We're supposed to create 3 maps, and my suggestion is the BIMS option is a map, and the first part of it includes a BOCES model, and the second part of it includes these intentional strategic mergers. Now, some of you may be thinking, why are you suggesting a BOCES model when that's just adding another layer of something? And it's making it more complicated than less complicated. And what I will answer to you is all the things that a BOCES models do, all of our districts are trying to do right now. Whether that's math PD or literacy professional development or literacy professional development or figuring out how to bulk buy toilet paper for 8 districts versus 30 districts. So and I asked this of this colleague of mine who runs a program like this in Pennsylvania, and what he said is when it's done properly with a timeline, the amount of money that you're saving and the collaboration, it's codified in the research that we shared. So I'm throwing out this recommendation, and then next slide, please. Our next steps.
Just to say on that, and one of the things that the template will speak to is to avoid duplication. If you move a function to the BOCES or using the BOCES services, you're pulling it out of your SEO and moving it up. So if you are working through the BOCES on regional professional development, that's something your local unit, governance unit, doesn't do anymore.
And, I spoke about the district, I was at the Rivendell district last year, and we didn't have a curriculum director. We had 4 schools, and we needed a math curriculum for K1, 2. It's aligned so that when you learn something in first grade, it grows on that in the second grade. We didn't have that, and we didn't have a curriculum director because we were small. With this model, that would allow for this. So the next step with the BIMS proposal is the details of the intentional merger and the map, and then revise the BOCES. So my thought is I would whip through this really quickly, and I apologize if I'm talking really fast. I don't drink coffee, but.
Wow. I know. And we have another.
So what I thought we could do after lunch is people could, flip through this. I mean, maybe there were things in this you're like, oh yeah, right, or oh, that's intriguing. And we could, in groups, just look at some of this and ask questions. We don't have to belabor it, but I do think it's important to, y'all might think this is a wackadoodle idea, or you might think, oh, maybe we should consider the BIMS model.
So open to considering wackadoodle.
That was excellent. That was really good.
Yeah, well done. Thank you.
Does anyone have more questions on this? We have a few minutes before lunch, so we have time to dig a little deeper.
I have a comment, but I'll go after Jay.
By all means, go ahead.
It's a small comment, but I think it's important. One of the knock-on effects of having a BOCES, I think, is allowing superintendents to focus on instruction and learning and not have to order toilet paper or whatever. Like, it shifts some of the work of the superintendent, possibly. That's what I've heard. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. Great.
And as Rebecca pointed out, that may be very different if you're in Southwest Vermont than if you're in Chittenden County in terms of the services that are being provided based on your entire portal and menu and dashboard, which says what's needed and what could help you.
Okay, thanks. Jay? He was Jay and then Dave.
I was going to add, I think another part that we really didn't discuss much is that, at least in the, I'm pretty sure the New York model functions similarly, but in the Pennsylvania model, there are 29 intermediate units or shared services organizations, and they function as an arm of the Department of Ed. So they work very hand in hand as far as rolling out professional development. Or if there's a statewide initiative, there was a statewide initiative on graduation requirements at one point. And when we were adopting whatever various standards were being developed, the IUs would take that policy initiative that came out of the legislature and was handed off to the Department of Ed, and then they would shepherd the implementation in their units. Our unit was a 3-county unit. It looks like you've divvied this up according to the VSA regions, which I think logically makes some sense because we already have relationships. We meet on a routine basis. And in the example that we learned about in the Southeast region, they've shown that it can be done. So I appreciate that.
When you look at this, sorry, just on that, just one of the things that we did try to say in here is that this does amplify the capacity of the AOE. And I think just historically, we've had a very challenging time implementing any of the stuff that comes out of the legislature. And I was just talking to someone, I've actually heard from several teachers that we passed a literacy bill. And I think that's the problem. We used to have very robust state level capacity for supporting professional learning. That has been gone since 2008. And so this would amplify that by giving the agency 5 touch points. It says that in here, 5 places that the agency has to touch to then amplify the implementation and development across the state.
Thanks. Dave?
2 questions. This is really good. It's not a question, it's a comment. First, business functions. Do you presume, or do BOCES presume, that back office functions are combined under the BOCES to save a lot of money in terms of combining business offices? That's one. And the second is looking at your high school science, the terrible variation between small and larger schools. Do the BOCES coordinate virtual learning, the way so many colleges are coordinating learning that doesn't require the teacher going around to all the blocks, but in fact allows for virtual learning among larger and smaller schools? Those are the two questions.
Vermont Virtual Learning is kind of like a service agency, right? In that it offers statewide access to those current programs. I think part of it is helping, and at our last presentation, the superintendent said, I had a bunch of students who needed toilet training. I had no idea what to do. Boom. Vermont Learning Collaborative came in and told them what to do right out of the gate. It's the case where a district might be saying, I need to figure out this kid so much needs challenge. How do I help this kid? BOCE, what do I do? BOCE will just say, here's 3 options that you could pursue. They're affordable and easily accessible, and one of them would be for virtual learning, which is amazing for a lot of kids. So it's sharing, it's having a more centralized way regionally to disseminate access to those opportunities.
What about business?
So in terms of
business.
the back office functions, my answer to both of your questions is yes, and it depends. And then when you look at the BOCES models in other states, different BOCES will provide more of what is asked, whether it's science classes or virtual learning or back office. So it really depends. The gentleman I spoke to, he is in Bucks County, which is sort of around Philadelphia, and what they provide is very different than up in Allegheny County. And so, and the answer is yes, that could be provided.
And on business, just to say, the other thing it would do is it could significantly improve the quality of our data, because we have significant data challenges associated with variation in systems, but also associated with variation in implementation, including with the Common Chart of Accounts. And it's pretty hard to talk about how we make things better if we actually don't even know what we're doing right now. So I think there's some real opportunities there.
And you think this could work in 5 districts or 5 regions?
We're hoping you'll give us feedback on that.
Yeah. Okay.
Jay?
Yeah, I would just add to that, in terms of the Pennsylvania model, it essentially it's a la carte. I mean, there were some really small districts that used the IUs for almost everything, but definitely HR. Some districts like to have their own local interviews for final hiring of teachers, but the IU would do all the screening, all the background check stuff, and give them a list of qualified candidates. The things like Medicaid billing, although we may not have to worry about that anymore, districts contracted with the IU to do all that. And there's a lot of contacting service providers and families, and the IU took care of that for these smaller districts. And they already elaborated on the special ed savings. There are a lot of back office costs associated with special education, tons of paperwork, meeting notices, all that stuff handled in the Tri-County unit and disseminated out. There, even health insurance. They had group purchasing with Blue Cross through the IUs. I know.
Talk about drivers.
So,
thank you.
Thanks.
yeah, so we're going to have some time after lunch. I just want to make sure, we didn't get a break, so, and next time we're behind schedule, we're going to give the floor to Jen so she can catch us up. That was awesome.
Jen.
Thanks, Jen.
But I think, should we break now for lunch and then come back at, 5 minutes to 1? Like, just so that we
Pick up some
use our
time.
time. We
I
might
like
pick
that.
up some time and have a little more opportunity.
That sounds good.
Sounds good. Okay. Thank you, everyone. See you at 12:55.